Today's webinar is called Keeping It Clean and Safe on the Farm. And we're going to be diving into worker training, water and sanitation on your farm. We have the joy and pleasure of having a video tour of White Lock Farm, which is in Baltimore City. And we'll have the farm manager from there and a few of the interns there talk a little bit more about their experience. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the people who helped put this webinar together. Chesapeake Harvest, which is on the based on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. They do a lot of food safety education and training. Of course, a lot of you are familiar with Future Harvest. They just had their conference, and this is one of their first workshops post-conference. And we have to give thanks to the USDA for the grant that is allowing us to put these things on and bring food safety education to farms, especially small farmers, urban farmers in the Mid-Atlantic region. Sonia, you can go to the next slide. So the team that is on this webinar today that I'll be instructing and answering your questions are myself, Lindsay Gilmore, Kimberly Rakes, Dana Barnes, and Crystal Foreman. Myself, I'm a food safety educator. I used to have a farm on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I'm currently a consultant working on a few farm education projects. I'll let Dana and Crystal introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll let Lindsay and Kimberly dive into their introductions. So Crystal, you can go.
Happy greetings, everyone. I'm Crystal Foreman. I am a food safety educator trainee in my first year. I'm going into towards tier 2, and I am a health and wellness educator as well.
And Dana.
Good afternoon. My name is Dana Barnes, and I am an intern at White Lock Community Farm. I am currently at second tier for Future Harvest, and welcome. That's it.
Thank you. Uh, Kimberly and Lindsay, are you ready?
I can go. So, hi everyone. I'm Lindsay. Oh, yeah, echoing on my phone. I'm Lindsay Gilmore. I'm a food safety educator. I've been working with farms, produce farms, for the last 12, 13 years now, helping them figure out food safety, produce safety, how to write food safety plans, how to get GAP certified, and been working with Chesapeake Harvest for the last 4 years. And Aaliyah and I have been partnering on getting more community-based food safety educators out in the world. So I'm very excited that we are all working together and that we're going to have new trainees coming on almost immediately for our next cohort of community-based food safety educators. So welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here.
And Kimberly.
Hey everyone, I'm Kimberly Rakes, White Lock Community Farm Manager and food safety educator with Lindsay and Alea. Welcome.
You and I'll give you a little background before we go through what we'll talk about in this presentation about the food safety educator program. It's an outreach project where we're able to use the resources we got through the grant to have one-on-one coaching with farmers to help them develop their food safety plans, to help talk them through FSMA regulations and gap auditing, and just, be able to be that a resource to small farmers who are thinking about those things, who want to be able to sell to different markets that may require a food safety plan or a gap audit. We also have this series of webinars that we'll be putting on. There's 2 more coming up we'll talk about towards the end of this webinar. And coming up in 2021, we'll also have even more webinars. So if you want to stay in contact, please, I'll put my email in the chat box just so that you can be on, be on the list to know about things that are coming up. And the third part of the project is that we train food safety educators. So, and this next cohort for next year, we have at least one opening. So if you're interested in being a food safety educator, to talk to your community and be a voice for your community around these topics, please reach out as well. And I'll put my email again. So what we'll talk about today is who on the farm needs to be trained in food safety. So I see there's already a question about volunteers. So hopefully a lot of those questions will be answered. The types and sources of contamination on the farm and how they are spread, how to reduce the risk of contamination spreading, what staff, volunteers, and visitors need to know about food safety, what are food contact surfaces and how to properly clean and sanitize them, what is post-harvest water, when it's recommended to use sanitizer and how to use it, and the importance of clean and tidy farming operation for food safety. And luckily you get to hear from an actual farmer and see how this helps her operation. So please stay engaged, ask questions. This is a great team who is very knowledgeable and happy to be of service. So good to have everyone here, and we'll get started.
Greetings, my name is Kimberly Rakes and I am the farm manager for Whitelock Community Farm in Baltimore, Maryland. This is my second year as a food safety education trainee. Here at Whitelock, we have a farm manager, myself, interns, and volunteers. Everyone who handles produce is trained in food safety. Through the Chesapeake Harvest Food Safety Project, Dana, Crystal, and myself are becoming community-based food safety educators. We've completed the PSA growers training, and we are helping to plan and participate in the supplementary modules that Lindsay Gilmore and Alea Frazier are leading.
Kimberly, so after 2 years of food safety training, what kinds of changes have you made at the farm?
All of our staff is now trained in food safety. We have added new wash stations.
Wash stations?
Yes, hand washing stations. We have them in 3 separate locations now. We always had one here on the main lot, but now we have them in our cooler area so that anyone is going in and out of the cooler can wash their hands as they're going in and coming out. And then we also have one on the south lot, which is across the street. That way you don't have to come over here to wash your hands every time you're doing something on the south side.
You're making it as easy as possible to do the right thing.
Exactly.
Right.
We are now laundering all of the reusable gloves regularly, and we have separate bags for clean and dirty gloves. We have spare clothing in case people need to cover up really dirty clothes before harvesting or packing. We have a nice break area for people to rest, eat, and drink so they don't do it in the field. Before they start working on the farm, all the Whitelock interns and volunteers that work with produce must watch a video from Cornell called Fruits, Vegetables, and Food Safety, Health and Hygiene on the Farm. This video teaches the basics of health and hygiene and produce safety, such as what are pathogens, where do they come from, and how are they spread, when and how to wash your hands properly, as well as what to do if you need to wear gloves, what to do if you are ill or injured, and what to look for and what to do if produce or equipment surfaces are contaminated. Then, as we work with people, we reinforce this training by demonstrating the right way to do things. We show people where to wash their hands, where to find the first aid kit, where clean gloves are kept, and where to take their breaks, how to handle clean and dirty equipment, and we talk about how food safety applies to each task on the farm, and how to keep food safe as we work.
Sonia, we're going to keep going for this next section.
White Lock Community Farm has 3 hand washing stations that use municipal water, and they are stocked with soap, paper towels, and trash can with a lid, and a safe way to dispose of wastewater. We have signage to remind people that we take food safety and hand washing very seriously. Wet your hands, add soap, and wash your hands thoroughly. Front and backs of your hands, the tips in between your fingers, and your lower wrist. Scrub your palms with your fingernails, which get them both cleaner. Rinse with clean water, then dry with a paper towel, not on your clothes. Put used paper towels in the covered trash can so that they don't blow around the farm. Now you're ready to start work.
Awesome. Before we go into the next section, could everyone just, or anyone who has any thoughts or questions about worker training and hand washing, type them in the chat box. It's also good to know hacks and farmer hacks that people have on their farms to help train their workers or make sure they're doing the right thing with hand washing. So use the chat box to talk about those things, and we'll move on to Kimberly's.
You ready? We're going to be talking about food safety training for your personnel on the farm. Keep in mind, when we're talking about personnel, a lot of our farms are urban farms, so we don't really have personnel. So that includes any staff that you may have. If you have interns from other locations, if you have interns from high school or universities, or just volunteers that help out in the community, from the community, those are also considered as personnel as we're going through the slide presentation. And all of our food safety training does apply to everyone who works on your farm. Next slide, please. Who needs to know? As I said, all of your volunteers, as you see on the slide, we have the workers in the back, and all of them have to be trained. You'll notice that there's a young lady who is washing produce. That person may be an intern or a volunteer. They would have to be trained. And you'll notice that there's a little person in the bottom as well. If you have young people that are working with you, you have to be sure that they are supervised. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, your volunteers, you may want to have all of your information together ahead of time. Maybe it's something you can use for your website so that folks can fill out their waiver form for being on your farm, as well as any information in regards to your standard operating procedures and any safety rules and regulations that you have on your farm. Especially with COVID-19, it's a good idea to have that information and be able to send it out to your volunteers so that they're aware of it before coming to your farm. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, we're talking about lower risk crops, crops that are not eaten raw. Those are the lower risk crops. If you think about the fact that you are, once something is cooked, it is going through what is called a kill process. So it allows for any germs and things to be, or bacteria to be processed instead of eating it when it's raw. Crops that are not eaten raw should definitely have a process to go through, as well as your cleaning process. Next slide, please.
Hey, Kimberly, I think we skipped a whole bunch of slides.
I thought so too, but I wasn't sure if I
Sonia, can you go back?
I didn't know how to go back and what to do, so.
There we go. No, this is the joy of Zoom and doing things.
Sorry, I'm not. Yeah, something was weird with the advancing.
Okay.
Everyone will have patience with us, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. What about your visitors? Please make sure everyone is aware that there are no pets allowed in your fields. That is a contamination right off the bat. Any visitors that you have should always be educated on what is happening on your farm, all of your rules, and your hand washing procedures. Please point out that you have signage on your farm so that they're aware, and ask them to please read the signs and be very aware of what is in the area and where they should be. You'll notice if you have the sign on the bottom says you pick customers. If your farm allows for its visitors to come and actually pick on your farm, you must make sure that they are very well aware of all of your clean techniques, know how to wash their hands, know where the bathrooms are located. So all visitors, even if they're just on a tour, everybody should know what your procedures are on the farm. Next slide, please. Visitors' health and hygiene policies. Now, this is extremely important. Everyone knows we are experiencing COVID-19. This is a tracking system. So if you do not have one currently, please make sure you put one in place. The visitors' health and hygiene policy should be visible for all of your visitors to see and be able to read. That is also something you can put on your website. But keep in mind, everyone should be signing in. This gives you an idea of who has been on your farm during any time. That helps you with a tracking system for COVID-19, as well as for your own records. Next slide, please. What should everyone learn? You'll notice on this picture, this young person is picking vegetables and they are wearing a diaper. Clothing is essential on the farm, and we really don't encourage young pickers such as this. It's better to have an area for your young people to be able to enjoy the farm, but you don't want them in the field where you're actually processing and harvesting your food. This could be a very hazardous situation. It's important for them to learn how to do things correctly, and it is important for them to be supervised when they are on the farm. What are some of the food safety hazards? Any source of contamination on food, physical, biological, or chemical, that may cause harm to someone. You'll notice there's the biological list: human, livestock, wildlife, and pests. Then we have the chemical list, and you can read the different chemicals that we are dealing with that you have to be aware of, and physical, and you see those listed there. Is there anything else that you can think of that might be on your farm that we did not list? If so, if you could put that in the chat box, we'd appreciate it. Next slide, please. The three categories of pathogens, microorganisms, examples, and the sources are listed below. Humans, animals, and soil. You'll notice the bacteria column. We're most of the time dealing with E. coli and Salmonella more than the other two, but we have to keep all of those in mind, and they all come from humans, animals, and soil. Parasites, you'll see them listed, and that has to deal with our water system. And of course, we know viruses, which we are dealing with currently, hepatitis A, neuroviruses, and those come from humans. Next slide, please. Higher risk crops. You'll remember we talked about lower risk crops earlier. Higher risk crops are any crops that are typically eaten raw. Now, we'll think about all of our vegetables and things that we eat, especially in the summertime, your tomatoes, your carrots. Those are generally eaten raw, as well as your lettuces and microgreens. Swiss chard, of course, can also be eaten raw as well as cooked. As a grower, as they grow, the closer they are to the ground, the higher the risk is for the contaminants. So please be aware of that, as well as your root vegetables. Next slide, please. Lower risk crops, which we talked about earlier, crops that are not eaten raw. As I said, when you go through a process of cooking, it helps to kill, well, it does kill most of the pathogens, and that is an excellent way to decrease the number of contaminants when you are dealing with crops that are not eaten raw. Next slide, please. Bacteria spreads. Bacteria gets into the food by fecal contamination, usually through unsanitary conditions in food processing, such as contaminated water used in crop irrigation, workers not washing their hands, and equipment not thoroughly cleaned. We must clean our equipment. I know it's easy at the end of the day to put your equipment away without washing it, but not only should it be washed and rinsed, but it should also be sanitized. Most of our farms, because of the funding that we received early during COVID, we may have received Sanidate 5.0. I think we'll talk about it a little later when Lindsay does the second half, but it is essential that you spray down and sanitize your tools as well as your wash station areas. Next slide, please. Sources of human contamination: your shoes, your clothing, your hands, if you have a cut on your hands, and the produce itself. These are different ways which we can contaminate and cross-contamination. That's why we ask that you, if you are working with livestock, please have a separate set of clothing, a separate pair of boots, possibly, so that you're not contaminating your produce when you're coming in and out of the livestock area. Hand washing is essential, and it is extremely important to do it for the 20 seconds. It's extremely important to get under your fingernails as well as the back of your hands and your wrists. If you have a cut, it is essential that it is covered. There should be a bandage on it as well as gloves to protect your finger as well as the produce from any cross-contamination. Next slide, please. Hands are a primary food contact surface. Of course, we're using our hands to pick, we're using our hands to wash, we're using our hands to package. So that is the primary source, the primary body part that is constantly in contact with the produce that you're picking, whether you're harvesting it or you're washing it or you're packing it. A lot of folks don't like to wear gloves, I understand, but it is essential that you make sure you have gloves for different things that you're doing, especially if you're working in different areas. I know it's a hassle to put them on and keep changing them, but it is better to use gloves than to use your plain hands. Next slide, please. When to wash your hands. Anytime you have used the restroom, anytime that you are in between breaks or leaving the farm or coming back on the farm from a break, anytime that you have had lunch or you have eaten or had something to drink, anytime you, as I said, as you go to the restroom, anytime that you pet an animal on the farm or someone's pet that's walking down the street, you must wash your hands. Remember, these are means of cross-contamination as well, and it's very essential to wash your hands each time and make sure that you toss your paper towels inside of a trash can with a lid on it. Next slide, please. Wet your hands. Apply your soap. Scrub for 20 seconds, as I said before, and you're going to rinse. When you dry with a paper towel or a hand dryer. Please don't reuse paper towels. That's another form of cross-contamination. Throw your paper towels in the trash, and please make sure if you have a trash can on your farm that it does have a lid on it, so that way we can keep down from having trash blowing around the farm that can contaminate the produce as well. Next slide, please. Gloves, as I mentioned before, I know a lot of folks don't like to use gloves, but it does make things a whole lot easier. When it comes to your fingernails, you don't have to wear gloves, but it is, I say it's a lot safer. And if,
Kimberly,
yes,
there are different, I hope you don't mind me jumping in here,
no,
but
no,
I
no.
mean, some, you don't, like it says, that you don't have to wear gloves, and some people have a real concern about the waste with disposable gloves, right? That we're putting a lot of waste into the landfill. So it's most important that you wash your hands, but if you do wear gloves, as Kimberly's going to say, you got to do it properly. But people have different opinions. Kimberly feels like it's better to wear gloves. There's no right opinion here.
Right, exactly. Just make sure, as Lindsay was just saying, that you put the gloves on correctly. If you look at the diagram to my left, it might be your right, I'm not sure, but if you look at the diagram there, it tells you exactly how to put on your gloves. If you look at the boxes that you purchase for your PPEs, it also has the directions on there as well. Next slide, please.
Did it skip to, or is this the right one?
No, it skipped.
Okay.
We're on slide 21. There, that's it.
Okay. Reusable gloves. You can have either the gloves, like at Whitelock, we have gloves that we have laundered at Laundry City once every 2 weeks. Some of you may use the reusable gloves that the people can take home themselves and wash them themselves. Depending upon what your method or your principles are, please be sure that when your workers or your volunteers are there, that they are aware that they should be washing their gloves if they're taking home their own gloves. Those should be washed each time they use them. Next slide, please. Toilets and hand washing facilities. They should always be cleaned and stocked. At Whitelock, we have a United Porta Potty, and it is serviced every Tuesday. So it is restocked and sprayed down and really thoroughly cleaned on the inside. Make sure that your hand washing station is convenient and located right next to your facilities. And make sure that that is always stocked and there's plenty of soap. That is also a fourth wash station for us at Whitelock. We also have one on the south side of the property that for washing your hands if you're dealing with produce, as well as the one that's located next to the facilities. Next slide, please. Make it easy to do the right thing. Convenient hand washing stations. Make sure that they are labeled and it's very clear to your staff or your volunteers where the wash stations are. Usually, if you do a tour with them when they first come in, that should be one of the first things that you're pointing out to them, where the wash stations are. They do not have to be fancy, guys. Don't worry about how cute it is. As long as it's essential and it has all of the necessary things, the soap, the water, paper towels, a trash can with a lid, then it's a good wash station. You don't have to worry about it being very put together. Make sure your paper towels are single-use paper towels. And like I said, that the trash can has a lid on it. You'll notice the one on the right does not. So we want to make sure that we keep down any debris from flying around the farm. Next slide, please.
Kimberly, you also notice that there's in each of those pictures, there's a way to capture the water after you've washed your hands. So the dirty water is captured so it can be safely disposed of.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. I apologize. Yes, you'll notice underneath there is a bucket where the water is being emptied into that bucket. Be sure, as Lindsay mentioned, that you empty that bucket throughout the day, making sure that it's not overflowing and that you dispose of it in a safe manner. Remember that water cannot go on your produce or on your farm. So you need to go to a separate location where you can dispose of the water in a responsible way. Thank you, Lindsay. Next slide, please. Clothing and footwear. You'll notice the farmer is walking through the chickens. Now, if this farmer is going over to the produce after they're finished feeding the chickens, you'll notice the picture next slide where it says, yep, that's poop. That gets in the bottom of your boots. And before you walk on your section where you have produce or where you're growing, you need to make sure that your shoes are removed and a new pair of boots are put on. Please, if you don't have extra boots, you might want to invest in it or ask people to bring a separate pair of shoes with them when they come to the farm if you're working with livestock and produce. Next slide, please. Bodily fluids. Blood injuries should be covered with a Band-Aid and hand injuries protected by a glove. If there is any bodily fluid, any possibility of things like this happening, you must secure the area where the person is. That person cannot contaminate your food. And if they have gone into an area where there is food, that food would need to, or that produce area would need to be quarantined or sectioned off. And then that produce would then have to be destroyed. So it's very important that that your staff know if they injure themselves to immediately stop working, to immediately get assistance, and to immediately handle and get medical care so that the rest of the staff know what has happened to them and can take care of that area that has been contaminated. Next slide, please. What are bodily fluids? Urinating, spitting, coughing, and sneezing. It sounds silly, but please make sure that your staff and your volunteers are aware that urinating, spitting, anywhere near the property or the field where their produce is growing is prohibited. The urination, of course, takes place in the facilities. Spitting should be handled away from the produce. A person needs to walk away from the field, maybe out to the street or to the curb where there is no produce. And anytime that you're coughing and sneezing, it should be in your armpit. So just as I demonstrated here, that's the way we should be doing it. And if they do happen to cough in their hands or sneeze, they should immediately wash their hands. Soap and water to get that clean before returning back to the field or doing anything that has to do with the produce or the farm. Next slide, please. Bodily fluids, and it says no eating, drinking, or smoking and chewing tobacco in or around produce, production, and equipment, except drinking water. And most of the time we suggest that you should have bottles of water for them to drink out of, or they bring their own bottle that has a top on it. That way you don't have to worry about them drinking out of a cup, or of course, glass on the farm is shouldn't even be allowed. Next slide, please. Illnesses. Main thing you need to keep in mind, I know it's hard to work with less staff, but if someone is sick, please let your staff and your volunteers know, stay home. You have to watch for signs of serious illnesses, coughing, sneezing, nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and jaundice. In case you're not sure what jaundice is, it's the yellowing of the eyes. Don't pick if you're sick. That's just a little bit of common sense, but honestly, it's better to have them stay home than to have them come to work and infect anyone else or accidentally get someone else sick. It's much easier to keep track of your employees and have them let you know when they are sick. Make them feel comfortable to let you know that they're not feeling well. Don't make it into an issue where they're not going to feel comfortable or afraid to say something to you if they're not well. Next slide, please. What to do if crops or food contact surfaces are contaminated? As I said before, of course, you're going to stop work immediately. You're going to isolate the area and dispose of any affected crops. Keep in mind, if there are crops that are affected, that produce shouldn't even go in your compost. It should be destroyed. Okay, that means it goes out in the trash. It should not be mixed in with any of your other produce or any of the other things that you, any of the other equipment or anything like that. That should all be disposed of. Especially during a pandemic, this is extremely important that we are conscientious of what has been contaminated, how it has been contaminated and isolated. We need to clean and sanitize the equipment and surfaces. As I explained before, there's a picture of the Sanidate. If you don't have it, you might want to get with Farm Alliance of Baltimore or your local extensions program, or talk to one of the food safety folks in the chat room, and we'll see what we can do as far as getting you the information so that you can have Sanidate. It is very good and it is a great sanitizer. When you're using Sanidate, you spray it while the surface is wet. So that's another important factor. Once you've washed and rinsed your equipment, it is important to spray it with Sanidate while it is wet. Next slide, please.
Back. Gone too far. There, back. Gone too far. Back. There it is.
There we go. Make it easy to do the right thing. Again, we're talking about your equipment, your PPEs. Make sure they're visible and everyone knows where to find them. Your first aid kit and your safety data sheets. So remember, if someone does have an incident on the farm, it needs to be documented. All of your information regarding safety and the farm's procedures, your standard operating procedures for safety, all of that should be located inside of the same binder and visible for everyone to see. It should be something that your interns, your volunteers, your staff can anytime access it, as well as read and reiterate for themselves just in case they've forgotten anything or just to refresh their memory. Next slide.
And Kimberly, the safety data sheets specifically are for any product that you get that is a registered poison, and sanitizers are very often registered poisons. If you drink them, you're going to get poisoned. They will come with the safety data sheet, or you can look it up online, and you want to have that on hand in case someone gets it in their eyes or their mouth or even on their skin, because it's very potent stuff, and it will tell you how to handle that problem.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay.
No problem.
All right, next slide, please. Make it easy to do the right thing. You'll notice in the break area, clean and comfortable break areas are important. Your volunteers and your staff will keep the area clean as long as it's enforced to them that it should be. Convenient storage for personal belongings, so that they know where their belongings are and they don't have to have all of those extra clothing with them when they're in the field. They can always come back to another area, change their clothes safely, and put their other clothes inside of a laundry bag. Next slide, please. Non-human contamination risks. As we mentioned before, no one should really have glass on a farm. You can see the hazards, and as we listed in the earlier slide, that was one of the hazards there. Any kind of chemicals, and on the following, the end, you'll see rat or mice feces. Those are non-human contaminants that are a huge risk. So when you're on your farm, first thing, as soon as you arrive and get your staff accustomed to doing this, take a walk around the property, identify anything, any contaminations, anything that you need to be aware of prior to getting your day started, so that those things can be cleaned up prior to getting your staff and everyone involved in their workday. Next slide, please. The people who do the work on your farm need to know what to look for. So that's why it's important for you to take a walk with them, especially when they're first starting off, so that you can show them what they are looking for. You're looking for dog feces, cat feces, you're looking for even the remnants of a cat that may lay in your field. You'll notice the different imprint on the grass or the different discoloration of the grass. So you need to be aware of what you should be looking for and identify it with your entire staff or interns and volunteers so that everyone knows what they're looking for and can identify and isolate the area. Next slide, please. Training tools for produce handlers. You'll notice, and if you don't have one, most of you who have gone to a Future Harvest Casa conference did receive this: fruits, vegetables, and food safety, health, and hygiene on the farm. It's a very good video. There's also the book you see there, which you can get when you take the food safety training class. And it's a good flip book that you can use to educate folks on your farm so that they're aware of the food safety field training, fresh produce handlers, rules and regulations. And it's really easy to read. It's also in Spanish, so it helps to be able to just sit down with your staff and have them go through the book and have them ask you any questions that they may have. Next slide, please. Make sure you have your signage, farm safety and hygiene signs. As we mentioned before, signage is extremely important. It reinforces all of the things that you're teaching and that you are expecting everyone to pay attention to on the farm. The same thing with your bathroom signage and your signage about pets. It's very important to have those visible for everyone to see so that everyone is aware of the rules on your farm. Next slide, please. Does your break area or your shoe area look like this? Tell us in the chat. What do you see here that would be disturbing if this were your farm area? How would you respond to this? And tell us in the chat room what you noticed in this area, in this, I guess you call it your break area, where everybody takes off their shoes, and tell us what's wrong with this picture. Next slide, please. Now that's a nice, healthy looking break area. It's nice to have the small area where they can take off their boots, and that also gives them an opportunity to get those washed down the way that they have them set up here. The clothing, as you notice, is off to the side and on hangers nice and neatly. So make it easy for them to do the right things so that they'll follow suit. And then the next interns and then the next group that comes in, the fresher ones that come in, the rookies, so to speak, when they come in, they're aware of the clean area and the way things are kept on the farm. Next slide, please. Okay. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat room. We're going to take a 5-minute break here.
Can we pause for a minute just to see if anyone wants to ask you a live question?
Absolutely.
And then we'll take the 5-minute break. So can anyone type it into the Q&A button or into the chat box if you have a question you want Kimberly or Lindsay to answer right now before we take a break? Must mean they're good teachers. But in the meantime, we have a 5-minute break. It's 3:46. So we'll come back at 3:51. And if any questions come up, we can start out the next section with those questions to get answered. So go get some water, take a bathroom break, all the good stuff, and we'll resume at 3:51.
All right. Good job, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Sonia's got a pee. Okay, we're all taking a break.
Did you want to say something, Lindsay?
No.
Oh, okay.
I thought I did.
All right.
It sure did.
Do we have Sonia back?
Yep, I'm about to share screen.
Okay, so we're gonna dive into another video. So you get to see more of White Lock Farm in person through the video, and then Lindsay will take over with the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, we're going to go back to White Lock Farm and look at keeping things clean and tidy.
And great, can you see it? We're ready to go?
Yeah.
Thanks.
At White Lock,
Is the sound coming through, Lindsay?
And the sound is coming through. It kind of started out fast and then slowed down, but
All right, hold on one second.
Zoom glitch.
we've gotten more organized so that clean and dirty harvest and packing equipment is clearly identified and clean equipment is stored safely in the sheds. Before going out to harvest, we pull clean harvest equipment from the storage shed and the harvest bins are lined with new plastic bags. We keep harvest bins off the ground while harvesting by turning a milk crate upside down and putting the bin on top. The harvested crops are never placed on the ground. When they come in from the field, the full bins are staged on benches in wash pack areas, and then they are either washed, spun, and packed, or packed dry. Then everything goes right into the cooler, ready for the CSA or the market stand.
What changes have you made with the cold storage?
Our cooler has a new floor. We have added a shelf and we have painted it so that we're able to actually spray it down when we want to clean. And then we put a rubber mat on the floor so that the ceramic tiles don't get broken.
And the shelf is there to stop things from being placed right on the floor?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
As an urban farm, trash is a consistent issue. We walk the property daily to remove trash and debris. Trash is emptied daily and picked up weekly. All the culled vegetables and plant waste goes into our compost bins so it doesn't build up in the field or around the pack area and attract pests.
Yep, keep going, Sonia. I'm sorry.
We are cleaning and sanitizing all of the food contact surfaces.
We use a 4-step process to clean and sanitize equipment and food contact surfaces. First, we clean off the dirt and debris by brushing or spraying with water. Then we use soap, water, and a brush and scrub the tool or surface. Scrubbing thoroughly helps to get into all the nooks and crannies. We rinse off the soap with clean water. Finally, we spray thoroughly with a sanitizer solution. For the sanitizer to be effective, the contact time is 2 minutes, which means the surface should stay wet with the sanitizer for at least that long. Once you've sprayed the clean equipment, you set it somewhere clean to dry. There's no need to rinse off the Sanidate solution. One of the sanitizers we use is Sanidate 5.0, which is peroxyacetic acid. This sanitizer is approved for use in organic. It's very important to follow the label instructions on how to handle and mix sanitizers, as they are extremely concentrated and potent substances. And we follow the label instructions to calculate the concentration and the contact time. Before mixing, we put on protective gloves. The required Sanidate concentration for sanitizing hard surfaces is 200 parts per million, which is 2 teaspoons per gallon of water. To mix in a spray bottle, we calculate how much sanitizer is needed for the amount of water in the container. Fill the container with water, carefully measure out the correct amount of sanitizer and mix it into the water. This spray bottle holds 1 quart of water, so the amount of Sanidate we mix in is just about 3/4 teaspoon.
Okay, we'll stop the video right there. Thank you, Sonia. So this is the way things have been going at Whitelock Community Farm these days. Sanitizer is part of the routine now. And I'm going to talk about sanitation in the field and once you get things out of the field, post-harvest. So with this, we're talking about what to do before you even begin to harvest and pack produce. And thinking about all the different food contact surfaces that you use in harvesting. You want to think about all those things on your farm, such as tools, your harvest totes or containers, the carts you may use to bring things in and out of the field, the trailer beds that you may use, the vehicles you may use to deliver food, packing lines, if you use packing lines. These are all food contact surfaces that you really need to pay attention to. They're very important in food safety. And so we're going to talk about that. So yeah, so we've got all the tools and surfaces you use during harvest and all the tools and surfaces that you use post-harvest, sinks, salad spinners, delivery vehicles, etc. So this is a really key thing. You've got to know the difference between cleaning and sanitizing. Sanitizing as a general idea is cleaning and, or sanitation, I should say, is the process of cleaning and sanitizing. It can get a little confusing with those words. But you can't sanitize a dirty surface. So it's really important that before you sanitize, you clean the surface. And sanitizing is a way of getting a clean surface even more safe by reducing the how would you say, the number of pathogens that may be on that surface to a level that is safe. So cleaning always comes first, and you have to remember that the water that you use for washing food contact surfaces must also be of the right quality, which means it must be free from detectable E. coli. And on the 9th of February, we're going to do, the next webinar is much more in-depth about water and water quality, so I'm not going to talk about it so much today. But if you're using municipal water, typically that is safe. Of course, there are some instances we know of, such as Flint, Michigan, and Newark, New Jersey, where water has not been safe, but not so much for E. coli, that's for other reasons. So there are 4 steps to cleaning and sanitizing food contact surfaces, whether it's harvest knives, totes, work tables, or packing lines. And the first step is to remove dirt and debris, and you may brush it off, you can spray it off, as long as you are getting that easy to remove dirt off in some way. The next step is to scrub with soap and water. Some people do use power washing. The only thing with power washing that you have to think about is that it aerosolizes whatever is on the surface. So you get a fine mist that could contain the pathogens, and then you're spreading that fine mist over a large area. So actually, just as with your hands, when you're scrubbing your hands with soap, it's a much more effective way of reducing the possibility of pathogens. Then step 3 is, of course, rinsing off that dirty soap, dirty soapy water, dirty soapy stuff on the surface. And then number 4 is applying sanitizer. And you want to make sure that whatever sanitizer you're using is approved for the use you're putting it to. So you want to check the label to see that it's labeled for use, in this case, on food contact surfaces. And it can be sprayed on. You can make up a solution in a bucket and dunk things in it. That's up to you. The advantage of making up a spray bottle, particularly with Sanidate, which lasts for a while, is that you use less of the sanitizer, and Sanidate is quite expensive. But if you're using chlorine, it's a much cheaper substance, germicidal bleach, for instance. You can use more of that without going through your money so quickly, and you could make up a tub or a bucket and dip larger things like harvest bins and that kind of stuff into it. You want to follow the label directions for the concentration of the sanitizer, and check to see how long the sanitizer needs to be on the surface to be effective. And you can easily get sanitizers that don't need to be rinsed off for the most part. If you're using much stronger sanitizers, you may have to rinse it off. So you have to check for that, and always allow the surface to air dry. You don't want to wipe it off because then you may use a towel or a paper towel. You may be cross-contaminating. So it's better to just let it air dry. It's important that the clean, sanitized equipment and surfaces drain dry and then are stored dry, because you know that bacteria really likes nutrients and it really likes water. It likes food and water, just like the rest of us. And so a dry surface is much safer than a wet surface. So you want to make sure it can be stored dry. Once you have a good procedure for cleaning equipment and tools, are you also ensuring that clean tools and equipment are stored so they can stay clean and dry and safe from contamination? And are you also ensuring that the tools and materials you use for cleaning the surfaces are stored in a way that you're not recontaminating or cross-contaminating? So you don't just have a bucket with a dirty mop and dirty towels. I mean, we see this everywhere. The funky bucket with the funky stuff in it that was used for cleaning things. Don't do that. Please don't do that. I'm sorry, Sonia, I'm not actually telling you to advance the slides.
Yes, I was just going to ask you if you could do that.
I'm in my own little Zoom world here.
I think I'm sort of keeping up.
You've been doing pretty well. Okay, well, we're on the same slide here, and this is a what's wrong with these pictures slide. So take a look at these pictures and put in the chat box what you see wrong with these pictures. One of them is fairly obvious. The other one may not be quite so obvious. I'm going to give you a minute or two to think about it. And the toolbox on the left is a common occurrence on a farm. Anybody have any suggestions to put in the chat box? Here we go, Jess. Okay, nice in the bucket, not a good idea. Also mix dirty with clean. Yep. Tools touching one another. The tools touching one another is a problem because some of them are clean and some of them are dirty. If they were all clean, that wouldn't be a problem. But yeah, this toolbox has rusty tools, it has dirty tools, it has clean tools, it has rubber bands. I mean, it's just a nasty little mess. The bins stored outside is okay, but look at where they're stored. The bins aren't directly on the ground, but look at the roof above them. That's it, runoff from the roof. Thank you, Mike. So birds poop on roofs. Rain runs off the roof onto the nice, clean, beautifully stacked, color-coded harvest bins. So with just a little bit of an adjustment, having them stored outside is fine under cover, but they haven't got an effective covering in that case. Okay, next slide, please. So how to keep things clean out in the field. So one of the things you saw in the video is that at Whitelock, they use a milk crate turned upside down, and they put the harvest basket or the harvest tote on top of that, so the harvest tote doesn't sit on the ground. This is particularly important if you've got a whole lot of totes and you're stacking them when you bring them into the packing area, and you've got dirt on the bottom of one tote getting onto the top of the contents of the one beneath it. So sometimes we call this a sacrificial bin. So you could stack a harvest bin inside another one, and the one on the bottom is the only one that ever touches the ground. Or you can use the milk crate method. And in this picture, you can see that they've actually bungee corded the tote. There's a double method. There's a milk crate and a tote, and then they're field packing in this instance. So they've got the field packaging, the packaging out in the field inside a harvest bin, and they have bungee corded the two things together there. Here we have our knives again. What's the problem with these? Look like tomato boxes on the left corner. Anybody notice? They are right on the ground. So once you start stacking them, you get dirt on top of the tomatoes beneath. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So can you ensure that the full harvest totes or the field pack product are protected out in the field or in the transport when you're transporting them back into the packing area? Are the transport vehicles clean? What was the last thing you hauled in that trailer? Was it trash? Was it compost? Was it animals? If you can't clean the trailer, this is a picture from Milestone Cooperative down in Mississippi. They just line the trailer with new cardboard boxes. So if you've got cardboard boxes to spare, you could do that. Or you could put down a clean tarpaulin. Next slide. So your washing and packing areas do not have to be fabulous. They don't have to be state of the art. They can be outside. But the main thing is, can you clean them? And keep in mind, the easier it is to clean, the less time it takes. So it's an efficiency thing as well as a food safety issue. And then again, how are you managing the drainage of gray water? Is it just dripping down and pouring down out into the field? Is it being channeled in some way? Do you in some places, the more fancy you get, typically you have plumbing and it's going right into the sewage system or the drainage system. But on smaller farms, quite often there isn't a drainage system. So do you have a safe way of capturing that gray water so it isn't recontaminating crops? And do you have any issues with standing water? Something to think about as well. Do you need to squeegee that floor so that there's no standing water that can get sprayed or splashed up onto things? Next slide. I think it went too far. The next slide. There we go. So what are your food contacted surfaces made of? Stainless steel, of course, is the one that everybody wants. It's the main thing is, can you actually clean and sanitize the surface? You can see in the picture on the right-hand side, the wood is already starting to chip away and get moldy. This is a very common, I see a lot of farms with this wooden frame with the mesh in the middle. If you can, you could put marine paint on that wood to seal it so that it doesn't get nasty and moldy. Or you can, is actually, LaQuanda, I don't know if you still have the link to the table that I sent you ages ago, but there is a stainless steel metal mesh table you can buy. It's actually used in greenhouses. It's a greenhouse table that I've seen at a couple of farms. It's really, really great because you can scrub it down and it's much easier to clean and sanitize. So wood is porous. It's the hardest to keep sanitary unless it's sealed. If you have I've seen packing lines where there are wooden sides, and old fruit packing lines quite often have wooden sides to them. And I usually advise the farmers to paint those with marine paint so that they can be washed, cleaned and sanitized. And again, there's that whole thing with power washing. Keep in mind that it aerosolizes the pathogens. So make sure if you are using power washing to clean things down that you aren't contaminating another surface at the same time. Next slide. Okay, what's wrong with this picture that I got at a fruit orchard last year? LaQuanda, I can probably find it too. It's super, oh, okay, it's super hard to put together. That's good information. So that metal mesh table, LaQuanda's saying it's hard to put together. Anybody tell me
cardboard, Lindsay? What are we looking at?
That is cardboard.
Mm.
So what would be the problem with cardboard? Cheryl, cannot be cleaned. That's right. So it was actually cardboard, and then there were also old towels in a lot of places as well that didn't look like they'd been cleaned recently. This was, yeah, this was a little scary, this particular packing line. So yeah, think about what your surfaces are and are they easy to clean. And as you upgrade your equipment, think about what you can clean and sanitize easily. Yes, Mike, it is. The cardboard is absorbent, exactly. So it's just going to absorb everything and it's going to get nasty. I mean, this is a dry packing line, I guess. At least that's what the farmers told me. But even so, you bring in a load of apples, if there's some bird poop on a few of those apples and it gets on the cardboard, then all of the apples going past that cardboard that touch it are going to get contaminated. Next slide. Okay, you want to think about what are the wet zones in your packing area? So there are usually some activities where water is used, and water always means that there's a higher risk of cross-contamination because water is one of the most effective ways for things to spread. So how you manage the drainage of grey water, we already talked about that. Do you have any issues with standing water? And drains, think about the drains. If you do have a drain, it's a really great spot for listeria to thrive. So you need to be cleaning and actually not just sanitizing, you may want to disinfect the drain on a regular basis. And I'm going to talk about the difference between sanitizing and disinfecting in a minute. Next slide. So you've got your wet areas and then you've got the areas that you want to keep dry. Next slide. Is there a way for your work to flow to reduce the risk of wet and dry crossing? Or are people and vehicles tracking dirty water and field dirt back and forth between wet and dry areas? So workflow, thinking about workflow so that it's more efficient can usually make it more food safe as well. Next slide. So are your dry and cold storage areas for packed product and packaging kept clean, tidy, dry, safe from contamination? Very important. Do you have condensation dripping on product in your cold storage areas? Is there a way to prevent this? Can you do something about the seal in the way that your cold storage unit is sealed so that it doesn't, condensation isn't created from heat exchange, inefficient heat exchange? At the very least, you can cover the product that might be dripped on. If you, now in some places, and particularly fruit orchards, they want to have some humidity in their cold storage areas. And you have to think about ways to do that without it dripping everywhere. So if anyone is here from an orchard, we can talk about that. But for most of the small farms that we're working with, it's better to just keep it dry. And then sometimes you need to make some changes. Sometimes people are sloppy. Sometimes you have an old area, an old farm with an old barn, and you've got some stuff you've got to clean up. Sometimes, as with the tomato boxes here, you learn the hard way that you can't stack them up too high. Sorry, Sonia. Sonia, yeah, that's the one. Thank you. So take a look at these pictures. You've got the tomato boxes that are just too heavy, and also probably some moisture in those boxes. It's causing them to crunch down like that. Then in the middle picture, you can see this was actually a farmer. He just bought the farm and he was storing his packaging in the old barn, and you can see the barn, the bird's nests right above. And then this had a kind of mezzanine with old hay above it where the mice had been nesting. It was just a nasty scene. He has a very nice new packing area now, but yeah, this was such a great example. I upset him by taking a photo, but such a great example. And then in the same barn, there was this area with old children's toys, drip tape, lay flat tape, all just kind of jumbled up together, which is a perfect opportunity for nesting wildlife and rodents. Next slide, please. So are you using new or reused packaging? I know quite often in small farms, you want to reuse packaging. And packaging is very expensive. Sometimes your buyers require you to use new packaging. At the very least, okay to use reused cardboard. Cardboard can't be sanitized, as we talked about earlier with that packing line, Cheryl. So what they do at a lot of farms, especially a lot of CSA farms now, and I believe they're doing this at Whitelock, is they line the reused cardboard boxes with plastic, a new plastic bag. You can also get these black reusable, collapsible crates that can be washed and sanitized. And actually in really big operations, there's a service that will wash and sanitize them for you. And the buyer sends the dirty ones to the service that washes and sanitizes, and then the clean sanitized ones come to the farm, and there's a closed loop there. But yeah, if you're reusing boxes, you just want to think through, do you need to line it with a new plastic bag, or put the produce into bags, clean bags that then go into the box?
That's what we do at Whitelock. We use the wax boxes and we line them with the plastic vented bags. All of our CSA customers know to bring their own fabric bag with them, and they take the plastic bag out of our wax box and put it inside of their bag, and then they leave, because our wax boxes, one, shouldn't be on the floor, and two, they should never leave the cool bot area. So that way we keep it sanitized.
That's great. So if you're selling to a wholesale buyer, sometimes they may want you to use a reusable box, in which case you have to make sure that it gets cleaned and sanitized in some way, or is lined with a new plastic bag. Larger buyers are going to want you to put it into new waxed or unwaxed cardboard boxes, depending on what the product is. And if anyone is selling to wholesale will know that packaging becomes a very, very costly part of the job, part of the business. So that we're going to move into post-harvest agricultural water, and I believe we have a video. You advance the slide, Sonia. Yeah. So we're going to talk about using sanitizer and produce wash water.
You ready for video?
Yeah, let's do the video.
Great.
Even though we have municipal water on the farm, which is potable and very low risk, when we wash high-risk crops such as salad greens, we add Sanidate to the wash water. This is just to be extra careful because we can't control everything that might contact the greens in the field, and we know people will eat them raw. We use 2 sinks to wash the greens. The first sink has potable water, and the second sink has solution of Sanidate and potable water. The sinks hold 15 gallons of water. For washing salad greens, we want a concentration in the range of 40 to 60 parts per million, which is about 3/4 teaspoon of Sanidate per gallon, or 3 tablespoons for 15 gallons. We carefully measure out the correct amount of Sanidate, add to the sink, and then add the water. We can change the water and Sanidate after washing every batch of greens, or we can use a Sanidate test strip to check the concentration of available proxyacetic acid that remains after each batch. A large amount of organic matter in the water can reduce the concentration of available sanitizer, so we use the test strips to see if more Sanidate needs to be added. After each batch, using a clean cup, we scoop up some of the wash water and immerse the test strips. You remove the test strip with the pad side up. Don't shake off the water, wait for 10 seconds, then compare the strips to the color chart on the vial to gauge the concentration. If the concentration has dropped below 40 ppm, you add a little more Sanidate and test again until you get back to the 40-60 ppm range.
Not every farm uses sanitizer in their produce wash water, and at Dicot Farm in Waldorf, Maryland, they choose not to. Here we can see Max Feder at Dicot Farm spray washing Hakurei turnips, sometimes called a single pass spray method. He's spraying with well water. The turnips don't sit in the water and it drains away immediately. And here, Max is dipping bok choy into a tub of water to rinse off any easy to remove dirt. The water in the tub is well water and the bok choy isn't submerged for long. Educators may recommend it, and audit standards may require using a sanitizer in reused or recirculated water. But ultimately, it is up to the farmer to use their judgment and assess the risk of cross-contamination in their washing process. At Dicot, all the food contact surfaces used in washing vegetables are cleaned and sanitized daily when in use, and the well water used for washing is potable, which means that water test results show no detectable coliform or E. coli. The farmers don't make any claim that their vegetables are pre-washed. and they don't have any customers or food safety audit standards they must comply with that require they use sanitizer in their vegetable wash water.
We're going to be visiting Dicot Farm via video in our February 9th webinar on agricultural water. So, one thing that I always say to farmers is there a way to not wash the produce? Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you really need to wash the produce because if you're putting it out at the farmer's market, it sells better if it's clean. There are some crops that, root crops for instance, that just look so much more beautiful when they're washed, even though they store better dirty. So if it's possible to not wash the produce, that just takes away a layer of potential contamination that you have when you do actually wash produce. So can you avoid it? Is there a way to can you field pack crops? So you're right out in the field. It actually saves you a lot of time if you can field pack things. Can you grow it clean? And by that, I mean, you can see in the two photos, the middle photo and the one on the right, that there is, hang on, let me see, let me do it bigger. There's actually mulch down in between the rows. There's the plastic mulch around the tomatoes. The drip lines are underneath the plastic mulch. Then with the garlic on the right-hand side, there's actually a cover crop in between the rows as well as the plastic mulch. So I've also been on farms where the kale, like Spiral Path Farm in Pennsylvania, which is a big organic farm. I need to get a photo of that for this. The kale is literally growing up out of a cover crop. There is no bare dirt on that farm. It's amazing. And what they actually feed, they make a lot of compost on that farm, and what they feed the compost is the cover crops more than they even feed the vegetable crops themselves. Next slide, please. Get there. Next slide, Sonia. Nope, gone too far. Back there. Ah, that's it. Tricky science is the same thing. So as I said earlier, for post-harvest water, to comply with the Food and Drug Administration Food Safety Modernization Act, the water has to test free of detectable E. coli. So you're not really supposed to use surface water for post-harvest uses. That surface water meaning creeks, rivers, ponds, lakes, even springs, because it's very hard to control. You don't have a consistent quality with surface water. It changes frequently unless you can really prove that your water, particularly say your spring water, it can test. You can really prove that it's free of detectable E. coli most of the time. You can't really use it unless you treat it. So if you do need to treat it, excuse me, there are a number of different ways. And UV filters are frequently used. This photo here on the right is a UV filter at a farm in central PA with Spring Farm. And he put the UV filter on the water as it comes into the packing shed. Oh, yes, it is my account. Let's see, I'm sorry, I got distracted by the chat. So his well water, where did I have this? His well water frequently, almost always has some E. coli. So he can use it in the field. Again, we're going to talk about water a lot more next time. You can have a certain amount of E. coli for irrigation, but for post-harvest, it has to be free of it. So because a little bit is always in his well water, he installed the UV filter, and then he tests the water that comes out of the other side of the UV filter to ensure that the UV filter is actually functioning properly, and then he can use that because it's free of E. coli. He can use that in the packing shed. He also has it for drinking water as well, and drinking water needs to be free of coliforms and E. coli. and have a certain level, beneath a certain level of nitrogen. So it's a little bit more stringent. So there are different kinds of treatment systems. UV filters are very common. You can get inline dosatron systems where it's shooting in a little bit of sanitizer as you're spraying things. This is a handheld one. There are bigger ones that you can have installed in your packing shed. Ozonators, this is an ozone ozonator. That's less common. Some people do use them, but typically it's more like a dosing system or a UV filter. And the dosing system might be chlorine, it might be sanidate. There are a number of different things you can use there. Next slide. Oh, we already did that. Next slide. Okay, great. So using sanitizer in wash systems is recommended in certain cases. So you have to think about what is your method for washing produce and whether you think you need to use sanitizer. So here you're thinking about what is the crop that I'm washing and how am I washing it? What kind of water am I using to wash it? These are the things you have to keep in mind. So if you are doing the single pass spray method, as was shown in the video at Dicot Farm, where you're just spreading in that case it was turnips, out on a table, a mesh table, and spraying it down, it's not required, as long as the water itself is potable or free of E. coli in this case, then you don't have to use sanitizer in the water. If you're reusing water, so if it's on a packing line where the water is recirculated and it's going, through and back up again and spraying and getting caught in a tank and then getting sprayed over again, it's really recommended that water is treated with sanitizer. And then if you're using a dunk tank or a wash tank where you're submerging a lot of product, again, it's recommended that you use sanitizer, especially if you're putting a lot of product in there. And once you've got the product on top, pushing the product underneath down, you've got water pressure that can also cause infiltration, where the water is actually getting forced into the fruit or vegetable. This particularly happens with cantaloupes and with tomatoes. Then it's really recommended that you use a sanitizer. However, unless you are getting GAP certified, and that's particularly USDA GAP certified or some other kind of GAP certification. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, it's very complicated. You're not required to use sanitizer. So again, at Dicot Farm, they choose not to. They don't want to use it. They keep everything very clean. They use potable water. Potable meaning it's drinkable, so it's free of coliforms and E. coli. And they're not submerging a lot of product in the water at once. So you could see the way Max was doing it. He was just dipping a couple of heads of bok choy at a time. And they change the water frequently. So once it gets dirty, it gets changed. It's a matter of deciding how high your risk is. If you're washing cut salad greens, that's a pretty high risk. That's a very high risk crop. So you may think, okay, we're going to use sanitizer in that. So this next slide, thank you. This is a really handy dandy chart that was created at the University of Vermont. You want to do research on the sanitizer and make sure, as I said earlier, that it's labeled for the use that you need it for, that you want to use it for. This chart from UVM is a really handy guide to concentrations for these different sanitizer, these products. These are specific products that you can buy. So Ultra Clorox brand regular bleach, which is a germicidal bleach, is one that can be used for both cleaning hard contact surfaces and sanitizer in wash water for fruits and vegetables. Can also be used for disinfecting. I'm going to talk about the difference between sanitizing and disinfecting in a minute. Sanidate 5.0, which is what they're using at Whitelock Community Farm. And if you're part of the Baltimore Farm Alliance of Baltimore, you probably got some Sanidate this past year. These are the recommended ranges of concentration for washing produce and for sanitizing food contact surfaces. And you can also see on here the contact time. So for Ultra Clorox brand, cleaning a hard surface, it needs to have a 2-minute contact time. Now this guide is great, but you definitely want to read the label. Always read the labels. I've seen a lot of different guides and they don't always agree with the labels. So make sure that you read your labels. Next slide, please. So here we've got germicidal bleach. We've got Sanidate 5.0. I think I already covered everything on that. So next slide. Sanitizing versus disinfecting. Back a slide, Sonia, please. And then back another slide. Yeah. And another one. There we go. Sanitizing versus disinfecting. So in this past year, there's been a lot of talk about sanitize this, disinfect that. It's two different things. And in fact, sterilizing is a third thing. So sanitizing refers to the reduction of microorganisms to a safe public health, a level that's safe for public health. So it's risk reduction. It's not a kill step. And if any of you have done serve safe training or any other kinds of processing food safety training, you learn about kill steps. So sanitizing is what's used most commonly by farmers and food manufacturers for food contact surfaces. You might disinfect the floor, you might disinfect the drains, you might disinfect the walls, but you don't disinfect a food contact surface because then the level of sanitizer that you put on the surface is not good for human consumption. So disinfecting refers to inanimate objects. So you don't ever disinfect fruits and vegetables. You can put them through a wash step with sanitizer, but if you disinfect them, they're no longer good for eating. So solid objects, and it's destruction of all vegetative cells. So it's actually a kill step, and in hospitals, they disinfect surfaces. And then sterilizing is the real kill step. That's referring to the actual destruction and removal of all living organisms. So that's a real kill step, and that in the hospital, they would sterilize their instruments, right? Pasteurizing is a lower heat and kills only some pathogens, so the food still has nutrient value. So you're not actually boiling something when you pasteurize it. So chlorine and peracetic acid may be used to disinfect surfaces as well as sanitize surfaces. But we go to the next slide, back to that chart again from University of Vermont. Again, you can see that it's different. It's a much higher concentration for disinfecting and a longer contact time. So you go from 200 ppms of germicidal bleach or sodium hypochlorite, sorry, to 2,700 ppms of sodium hypochlorite to disinfect. So you see that's a very big difference, and a 2-minute contact time to a 5-minute contact time, and you have to rinse when you're disinfecting. So it's a very different process and not needed for food contact surfaces. Next slide, please. So the next thing, if you're going to use sanitizer, you need to have tools to monitor the sanitizer level. And you saw in the video that at Whitelock, they're using the test strips that you get specifically for Sanidate 5.0. You can get test strips that are specifically for sodium hypochlorite or bleach. There's also an ORP meter, which is testing, I can't remember what ORP stands for. Somebody here probably knows that. But anyway, it's a different kind of test, but it helps you to understand whether you're at the right level of concentration in your solution. And then the other thing you may have to test for, especially if you're using a chlorine sanitizer, is the pH, because chlorine is very sensitive to pH. It needs to be very neutral. And the turbidity, the more organic matter in the water, the more it binds the peracetic acid or the chlorine. So you can get a turbidity meter, which is basically it's called a Secchi disc. and you drop it in the bottom of your wash tub or your bucket. And if you can't see the white, it's black and white. And if you can't see the white part of the seki disc, then you know you've got too much stuff in there and you need to change the water. But if you're using Sanidate, typically it's a less sensitive substance. It's more expensive, but you can use less of it typically, and it is a lot more stable. Next slide. Yeah, make sure you have the right testing tool for your sanitizer. I already talked about that. Next slide. This was on the wall at Dicot Farm. I thought it was a really nice, straightforward, standard operating procedure. They just spell out what it is everybody needs to know. They've got the 4-step clean and sanitize method there. And then make sure that you're storing dirty things separate from clean things. And dry equipment should be stacked and stored in clean designated areas. So this is a really nice example of a simple standard operating procedure so that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Next slide. If you like record keeping, or if you actually have to comply with the FSMA produce safety rule, 2 of the records that you must keep are worker training records. And if you do treat your water, you have to keep records of water treatment and water change schedules. So if anybody needs these, we can make sure that they're available to you. Next slide. Again, if you like record keeping, you can create a schedule. Well, you can create a schedule and put it on the wall. You can also create a schedule and actually keep track, monitor that these things are actually done, or verify that these things are actually done. And if you're going to get GAP certified, you'll be keeping equipment cleaning records. Next slide. I think it's a really great idea to have a checklist that everybody is trained in using. And you want to make sure that you have on that checklist whatever it is you need to know on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever checklist you like to have that's going to work for you. You may not need to have worker health and hygiene on your daily checklist. Maybe that's at the beginning of the season, everybody gets trained. Or if you have a transient workforce, if you've got a lot of volunteers coming in and going, then you do want to have worker health and hygiene on your pre-harvest checklist. So this can be a pre-harvest and pre-packing checklist too. And I have a lot of different versions of this kind of thing. Next slide. So just a quick recap, key elements to reduce risk. A farm, of course, will never be a sterile environment. It's not a hospital or a food manufacturing factory, but it's important to have common sense practices in place to keep everything reasonably clean. If you have a new shiny packing area, it's a whole lot easier to keep clean, but you can still keep an older facility clean, an older barn clean as best you can. And growers use a wide variety of packaging and packing methods. Well-designed packing lines can certainly increase efficiency, but they're not required for food safety. So what are the common sense rules? Pay attention to potential risks, understand what they are and pay attention to them. All effort should be taken to prevent damage or contamination of the produce during packing activities. Train people, communicate well, and be a good model for food safety practices so they become part of your regular daily routine. If the person in charge or the person with authority is not taking food safety seriously, no one else is going to. Organize things so it's easy to do the right thing. Store clean equipment and packaging so they remain clean and dry until you need them. Clean up inside and around the buildings regularly so you avoid creating wonderful habitat for critters. And the bottom line is keeping things tidy, clean, and sanitary. When I go onto a farm and I see that it's clean and tidy, I just kind of relax inside because I know that food safety for them is going to be a lot easier. I've been on some farms where honestly, I want to just turn around and drive away because there's 27 cats or there's just piles of junk everywhere. And it's very common to have what are they called? Bone piles on farms. Very not unusual at all, but it really does help to clean things up and keep things clean and tidy. I'm a chef, and if I don't have a clean kitchen, I can't work efficiently. It's the same thing on a farm. Next slide. Actually, Aaliyah's putting our contact information in the chat. And then our very last slide is a flyer for the next 2 webinars coming up. Sonia, can you go back to the slide with our contact information? So I just want to let you all know that through our food safety project, which is funded by USDA, National Institute for Food and Agriculture, NIFA, we have a food safety outreach program. We are training, as Aaliyah said, I just want to reiterate, we're training folks to be community-based food safety educators. So you don't have to be part of a university. You don't have to work for a Department of Agriculture. We are really trying to make it possible, as I've had the opportunity to get a lot of training without being part of any kind of institution. And we want to make that available to people. So we're going to have more of these food safety webinars throughout the next 2 years and probably ongoing. We will be providing one-on-one assistance for farmers. We can do on-farm risk assessments. We have funding to do 20 of those over the next couple of years. We can help you write standard operating procedures. If you need a food safety plan, whether it's just for getting organized or if you want to get GAP certified, we're going to be able to help with that. And also just helping you get ready for a GAP audit if that is something that your buyers are requiring of you. Okay, so we were going to take another short break and then just...
Oh, no, we're not going to take a break anymore.
Okay. So no break. We're just going to go right into Q&A.
Yep.
Sonia, thank you for putting up with my running ahead without you.
So there were 2 questions I saw that may not have gotten addressed. If we're using a water dispenser as hand washing stations, would you recommend disinfecting rather than sanitizing?
Sanitizing is sufficient for cleaning out that dispenser. It could be a little bit of your own judgment. If you feel like it's getting a little slimy, if you're only sanitizing and it's getting a little slimy, maybe you disinfect it a couple of times, through the season just to really give it a good clean. But if you do that, don't add any water back into it until it's thoroughly dry. You've got to rinse out the disinfectant and then let it dry completely before you add water, because you don't want that strong sanitizer in there. It'll actually damage people's hands.
And then I see the last one was about staying on if they want to talk to you about regulations for volunteers to pack on farms.
Right. So this was something, you guys, is Jenna, these Jenna's colleagues maybe. So there aren't any specific, it depends on what you're doing, but I think in your case, it's doing, it's like a food pantry type of situation, or where you're gleaning and distributing food distribution to people. Everybody should get trained. All volunteers should get trained in food safety, particularly if you're going to farms and gleaning from a farmer's crops. For their sake, it's really important that everybody who's working in their fields and on their crops is getting food safety training. But it's not a requirement in that particular instance. Now, unless that farm is covered by the produce safety rule or is getting GAP audited, in which case it would be required. But I think it probably best practices would be to train everybody and keep records that everyone is trained, so that if there are any problems, you have that record. If somebody says, well, I don't know, I don't even want to think up problems, but just a really good idea. So yeah, so it's not a serve safe training because they're not cooking. So you don't have to be concerned about the right, holding food at the correct temperatures and that kind of stuff. It's this kind of health and hygiene training, what to look for in the field so that they're not, so they know when to wash their hands, they know to come to work in clean clothes and shoes, and they know what to do if they get injured, if they sneeze. They know what to do if they're going to wear gloves, and also they know what to look for in the field. So it's this kind of training where they know to look for animal feces, they know to look for physical, chemical contamination or rocks, broken bits of wood, glass in amongst the crops. If indoor space is lacking, can wash stations be tarped outside? Absolutely. Absolutely. The main thing is that they're clean before you use them. And at Whitelock, the washing sinks and the packing table, they're stainless steel, but they're still outside. And you guys, Kimberly, you cover them with plastic, right, in between use, I noticed?
Yes, we use a plastic tarp similar to the same tarp that's on the hoop house. It's heavy duty plastic, and we cover both sinks. Right. And the stainless steel top that we have, that is actually covered with a tarp right now.
And I work with a whole bunch, a big Amish co-op that they do Pennsylvania Simply Sweet onions, and they harvest into big wooden bins, and those bins are stored in all kinds of places throughout the winter. Quite often they can have animals nesting in them, or they might be stored outside, but they get cleaned really thoroughly and dried just before they're used. So it's not necessary that everything is perfect when it's not in use. Just when it's in use, it needs to be clean and sanitary. What is the best way to go about getting food safety training? I am not a farmer. Well, this particular webinar was a kind of food safety training. I think we covered a lot of stuff for you. Aaliyah, I don't know if you have seen it, but University of Maryland has a bunch of videos now. I tried to access them just before this, but for some reason I wasn't able to get into them. But there's in our follow-up email, we'll send some information on different places to get things. But there's also the video that Kimberly talked about in the video, in our Whitelock video, and in this presentation from Cornell, is an older one. We're waiting for their new ones to come out, and I think there's going to be a series of food safety training videos, and we will share those as soon as they're available. Everything got held up by the pandemic. They were supposed to be done 6 months ago.
And if you have any specific questions or like trajectory you want to go with your training, feel free to reach out to, we might be able to work with you.
Yeah, that's true. If you have a group of people that you want to train, we may be able to just do a training for you. But we need to train the trainer so that you have someone who can continuously do the training. We can't really do trainings on a regular basis, but we could train a trainer. And Namita, we put in the chat a link to that flip chart that Kimberly talked about from Penn State. You can buy that. Go online and buy it. There it is. Kimberly's holding it up. I think it's $24, something like that. And that's something you can use to train people with as well. Were there any other questions in the Q&A? Let's see. Regulations, food distribution. So Namita, you had asked about people who work on the food distribution side of things, specifically. If they're not actually processing food, they're just handling food that's coming in, maybe they're packing it into boxes or something, then this kind of training is sufficient. If they're processing food, if they start using knives and chopping and cutting and so on, that's a different kind. That's a more intense training, and that's when serve safe may be necessary. But we're not talking about food processing here. We're talking about growing it, harvesting it, and packing it. Is that it for questions? LaQuanda, did I answer your hand sanitizer question adequately? Basically, hand sanitizer is no replacement for hand washing. Thank you. I just hope everyone got that. We've been asked to use hand sanitizer this past year because of the pandemic, but it really is not a substitute for hand washing. It doesn't, it's the same kind of thing. You can't sanitize a dirty surface effectively. It's something you may have to do if you don't, you're in certain circumstances and the only thing you have is a hand sanitizer, but it's not ideal. Cheryl, are there state regs beyond these general guidelines? Do we need to check with the state of Maryland? Can you be more specific, Cheryl, about what you're doing? You can check with Deanna Baldwin at the Department of Agriculture, Maryland Department of Agriculture, and she's usually very responsive. State regs may apply more to food processing. So repacking on a farm. So repacking on a farm it still comes up under federal regulation. So you can check with Deanna Baldwin. Let me find her. We also have a webinar that we did in 2019 that was helping people understand the difference between what was regulation and what was GAP certification, which might help answer some of your questions. I have to track down, that's on the Future Harvest Castle website. Let me just find Deanna Baldwin's contact info. For repacking on a farm, so the regulation applies if it's a farm of a certain size selling to certain kinds of customers. So yeah, Aaliyah just did another friendly reminder to fill out our short survey. The survey is really critical for us to continue to get funding. We need to be able to report that we're doing things effectively to be able to get more funding, to be able to do this and deliver it to you for free, and all the other services that we provide. So the produce safety rule, which is a relatively new regulation, applies to farms that are grossing more than $25,000 a year in produce and selling to mostly wholesale buyers, larger wholesale buyers. There aren't any regulations for very small farms at this point, except if you actually poison someone, you're still going to be subject to regulation. What they call adulteration. If there's adulteration of food, you can still be, the FDA is still going to show up if somebody complains. But if you're very small, typically you won't have to comply with any regulations. However, what we're trying to teach you here is just the common sense baseline. This is what you need to do so that you don't make people sick. And to, or at least reduce the risk of making people sick. Because obviously none of you want to do that. However, if you are on a farm that's grossing more than $25,000 in produce, it gets a little more complicated, but you may be subject to the produce safety rule. And there's a specific training for that. That's the training that Kimberly mentioned earlier, the Produce Safety Alliance grower training that you would have to take as a grower. I know that University of Maryland, I think they just did a bunch of those trainings. I'm not sure if they're doing any more this year, but there are, I believe, Aaliyah, you put a link into the PSA grower trainings in the chat.
Yeah, I put a link in. I didn't double check to see if there were any, coming up.
Well, a lot of them now are remote. Obviously, they're not in person, and so you could take one from anywhere in the country. And it's a one-day training. I don't actually, now that they're doing it remotely, it might be more than one day. But yeah, so let's just repost that. Hold on. Damn it. But if you're doing food processing, then there are state and there are even county regulations. That gets a lot more complicated if you're processing. But if you're still farming, If it's what's considered farming, then it's just the federal regulation that you have to comply with. And Cheryl, you need to, if you're going to different farms, you need to check with the farmer what they're required, what they need, because if they're getting GAP certified, that's a whole other level of auditing and oversight that they need to comply with. If they just have to comply with the produce safety rule, then worker training is probably sufficient. Okay, no GAP certified farms, good. They probably wouldn't want to, well, that's not true. They might provide you with a field that they're done with, and then they don't have to worry about certifying that crop. So I wouldn't rule it out. Any final questions? Dana and Crystal, do you have any things that you think we haven't covered? Or any questions?
I thought it was pretty thorough. I don't have any questions.
Okay. Good. Did you learn anything?
Yeah, I think the same thing. Yeah, I think you were pretty thorough. Yeah, everything sounds great.
Did you feel like you learned new stuff?
Of course, you always learn new stuff.
Good.
You can watch it a million times. There's always something that you're going to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I had to have this stuff repeated to me over and over and over again until it sunk into my brain. And I'm still learning. I'm still going to be taking trainings myself this year on how to interpret GAP standards and all kinds of things. So, yeah. And if you're really into food safety, I recommend, if you haven't already, doing a ServSafe training, because it's interesting to learn what you need to know about for cooked foods and processing foods and ready to eat foods. It's just another layer of information. All right, we're at 2 minutes too.
Yeah, we did good. I don't see any more questions coming in. So I just reminded everyone that we're gonna, there's this survey to fill out, as Lindsay mentioned, and it's in the chat, but we'll also send a follow-up email that will have the link to the survey, the link to the 2 upcoming webinars, and all the resources that we've talked about in this webinar. We'll also send a video, the video of the Zoom, so you can watch it on your own time, and also the video that was shared throughout the presentation of White Lock Farm. So you'll get a pretty packed email in the next couple of days.
Thank you all so much. Yeah. And just want to say there's a lot of really important miniature critters on your farm that you need to take care of. We're just concerned about the ones that make us sick, but all the other ones are way more important. All those tiny little organisms that make things work.
Well, thank you. We'll see you on the next webinar, February 9th. Sign up. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.